empowered people make informed decisions that lead to living a life without regret. This is Sara Khaki and Shawna Woods from Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and this is the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast.
Welcome to the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. I'm Sara Khaki with Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and I'm joined by our very own managing partner, Shawna Woods. And today we're discussing adultery and how it impacts breakups. Is it the cause of a breakup? Is it the cause of the end of a divorce? And how do you respond afterwards? Shawna, I know you have very specific thoughts and some interesting insight into this. Why don't you get us started on this conversation?
Absolutely. And I am going to pull on my experience here. And, I have been practicing for nearly 22 years now. In all of that time, in 22 years, I have had one court, one time, find that adultery was the cause of the breakup of the marriage. And when we look at what the actual cause is, oftentimes we kind of say, oh, adultery was a symptom. But specifically here today, I want to talk about that client who comes in and really wants you to hire a private investigator. They really just have to know for sure. They have to know for sure if their spouse is cheating. They don't want the divorce unless they know for sure. Or even when they tell me, absolutely, I want the divorce, but I have to know for sure, right? It's a very interesting conversation that we start to have because I want to know what it is, why they say, I have to know for sure. And I'm putting that in quotations because the vast majority of time when someone comes in and they're wanting to seek to find out if their spouse is cheating, the issue is either they don't trust their spouse for good or not good reasons, or they don't trust their own instincts. So let's talk about not trusting your own instincts first. If you're coming to me and saying, my spouse is hiding their phone, my spouse is going off in the other room to talk to somebody, my spouse is working late, but they're not at the location they said they were, all these little clues that are leading up. And I ask, well, what does your spouse say when you confront them? Well, I haven't confronted them. Or they deny it when I confront them. So the next question for me is, do you believe right now in your heart that your spouse is cheating or not? And if they can't answer that question, most of the time, I'm going to send them to therapy before I'm going to send them to a private investigator. Because you're not listening to things of yourself that is telling you there are some red flags here, you're not addressing it in your marriage, and you're not addressing that within yourself. There are times when people come to me and they say, I think my spouse is cheating, and none of those little things are happening. It just turns out sometime in their past, maybe they've been cheated on before, or maybe they've had some reason to lose track of trusting themselves. And again, the next step is therapy. You need to figure out in yourself whether it's not you're not trusting yourself for a good reason or not trusting yourself for a bad reason before you even work on the marriage.
Or even go through the divorce process, because so much of the divorce process requires you to start trusting yourself again, right? Because there's a whole identity crisis that happens throughout the divorce process and even after getting divorced, where you're not sure, who am I if I'm not this married person? I never would have identified myself as a divorced person. Now I have this new thing that I have to choose whether I want to carry it on as my identity or not. And so you have this dark period where you're not sure you can trust yourself, you're not sure who you are. And in the early stages of it might be even before you get divorced, it starts showing up because you're looking for this smoking gun moment that can put everything in place and dictate who's the good guy and who's the bad guy that brought us here. And what if you'll never get that?
Right. And if you don't trust the other person, that's a whole other conversation. Have they done something that has shattered your trust? Or is there something in the relationship itself that the trust was never built? Right. So you need those conversations as well. And to Sarah's point, You're going to need therapy going through a divorce anyway. So prior to starting the divorce, if you're hinging on, I need to know, what you first need to do is go to therapy and or marriage counseling to figure out what is the trust issue, either with yourself or with someone else. But we also have those, is adultery the cause of the breakup of the marriage if it is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time it's not. Most of the time, there's something else going on, whether it's these trust issues that we've been talking about, or it's a breakdown in the marriage of itself.
Yes, I 100% agree that adultery is usually the symptom of something larger. I do think you have situations where that one spouse is just a lack of a better word, just a straight up asshole, and they have don't take any have no compassion, don't take any of them commitments seriously, and you're just dealing with somebody that whatever title you want to put on it, doesn't care and does whatever they want, and you're just with a bad person. But outside of that, when you're talking about the bell curve of people whose marriage ends up in infidelity, usually when you dig past it, there was a lot more going on that led to that point. There was a point where somebody had absolutely just checked out. Somebody and one person might have sent signals for a while, hey, this is what's going on, and we need to work on this, and the other person avoided them, or somebody disconnected from them. Or there's also situations where your spouse just doesn't trust you, even though you've never done anything, and you get to the point where you're like, you know what, why does it even matter? I always tell clients it takes two people to make a marriage work, and it takes two people to break it apart. It doesn't always mean that both people can be 50-50 at any given time. Sometimes one spouse is at 90 and the other one's at 10. Sometimes one's at 70, the other one's at 30, just depending on what life brings and what each person's strengths and weaknesses are. But at the end of the day, if both parties can take responsibility for the making of a marriage as much as of a breakdown of it, it is a lot easier to move on. Not saying that being cheated on isn't such an incredible betrayal, so hurtful, so painful. I mean, we see clients that have gone through it, and it's devastating. And it really takes a lot to get past that. But the one way to get past it is to forgive yourself, because there is a part of you that feels somehow you participated, whether you turned a blind eye, whether you weren't paying attention to something, or whether you want to blame yourself for pushing somebody in that direction. But first thing to forgive yourself for it. And second thing is to just say, okay, what was my part in this, so that if, I don't repeat this pattern again in my life. But staying angry about it and staying angry at yourself or punishing yourself or the other person, you're bound to repeat it again.
And to Sarah's point, a lot of this that we're talking about is emotional, of course. I'm the one who comes in and says, and on the legal side,
Right.
because there is a legal side to this, because in Georgia, they still allow you to file on false grounds and say, the cause of my breakup is adultery. And then you have to go try to prove this in court. And what I challenge people is, what do you think that's going to get you?
Right.
Because if you're looking at, well, I just want the satisfaction of somebody declaring that they committed adultery, you're not going to get that kind of satisfaction that you believe you're going to get. Quite frankly, most of the time, court can be very anticlimactic, especially when we settle and all we have to do is present the documents. Going to court, going to litigation to prove that your spouse cheated on you is a very expensive way to get probably nothing.
Right.
You're probably not going to get that satisfaction that you felt you wanted. I might get some zingers on cross-examination or on her, I might really beat that person up. But if you have children, well, how is that good for anybody? Because then your co-parenting relationship is tanked. And if you don't have children, at the end of the day, it's not going to get you anywhere unless there's very specific facts. If they spent money traveling with a paramour, if they spent money buying things for a paramour, it's about the finances, folks, right? If they have dissipated an asset, whether through adultery or any other means, we might be able to regain that asset back, but nobody's going to stand up in court and say, your spouse was the devil and they cheated on you. And you're not going to get that kind of affirmation if that's what you're looking for. And most of the time when I find somebody who wants to file on the grounds of adultery, that's kind of what they're looking for. They're looking for punishment. In my experience, the courts do not normally, quote unquote, punish somebody for having an adulterous affair. We've all come to the terms, like Sara was saying, that there are two people in this marriage. There are two people who make a marriage and two people who break a marriage. That does not mean I condone adultery at all. I think it's one of the most hurtful and harmful things that you can do to a family. To destroy somebody's trust in you at that very base level, I think is really something that somebody who has done that has to do a lot of self-reflection and coming to the table to think about where did I go wrong in this. So I want to be very strong and say I'm not condoning adultery, but what we're saying is that's the reason. If you're saying I need to punish my spouse because they committed adultery and that's why I need to know and that's why we need to file on it, that's not going to happen in court. The likelihood of that happening is very low.
Yes, and I think it's important to internalize emotionally and remind ourselves that when we take responsibility for our part in something, it does not mean we take responsibility for somebody else's poor behavior, right? The reason
Yes.
we take responsibility for it is so that we can get past being the victim of somebody's poor behavior and not let that person have any more control or power over us. But it's not to excuse somebody's just immature, childish, very hurtful, painful behavior where they and use your own sense of responsibility as a scapegoat for them not doing the thing with integrity, which is speak up before something like that happens. So it's not meant to excuse that, and I think sometimes people get that confused, and it's hurtful when they hear that. Oh, what do I have to take responsibility for here? Really, nothing other than what signs or part of yourselves did you know that gave you any instinct that you might have shut down that you could have paid attention to? Or what part of yourselves did you not speak up for when you saw early signs? And then how are you not standing up for yourself now? And how are you staying responsible for this to not turn into an obsession for you? Because everything Shawna talked about at the beginning of this, when people have all these questions and they want to get a private investigator, sometimes they're doing this when the facts are clear, or the spouses even come out and mention, this happened, I'm sorry. And still, we have clients that may want to get all of the dirt, all of the information. It becomes an obsession. And I think there's multiple reasons it might become an obsession, and maybe we'll spell them out and help people identify them internally. First of all, you're not broken if you're feeling this way. We all have a intellectual brain that needs to be satisfied. We have an ego that's designed to protect us and keep us from harm. And if these things, when you are in a place where you're deeply hurt or you feel unsafe and your world's been shaken up, your intellectual mind and your ego is going to go into full gear. It is going to go like in full working mode to solve the problem and protect you, solve the problem and protect you. And if you don't balance that with self-care, with awareness, with therapy and a support system, and really just listening to your inner self and trust yourself, you will let that monkey brain that wants to solve problems and the ego that wants to protect you take over. And what will it do? It will obsess, and it will, your need to be right will go off the charts. You may start seeing things to be reality that aren't. You may start trying to validate things that aren't even real, because it's the only way you can make sense of your world at that point. So you may isolate other people in your life that are actually there to support you. Your need for control may go off the charts to the point you can make yourself sick because you feel out of control. And so again, your reality no longer makes sense to you because something you believed turned out to be false. Something you put your faith in, something you put your future in turned out to be false. So what else is not right? Where else am I out of control? What else do I need to question? And then you have an intellectual mind that just generally needs to understand its reality at any time. And when your reality has been shaken up or you're not sure why somebody would do this to you, you have a need to understand it. And I'm here to explain to you, you cannot control other people and you cannot always fully understand other people's behavior. You'll make yourself sick trying to do that. You can really just control the one thing you can is yourself. And the one person you need to understand is yourself. But you cannot externalize that. I think this is the rabbit hole people go down, and then they go and throw away their life savings on private investigators and lawyers, trying to feel more in control, trying to gain their identity back, trying to make sense of their reality and understand it. And whether it's us or the private investigator, we may never be able to provide that.
And to Sarah's point, even if you find out information and it confirms that this person is stepping out, a lot of times what happens is the specifics of the information that you find out are more hurtful than just knowing that it happened. And why is it that you want to do that to yourself? Why cut that wound open and pour salt in it? It is so detrimental sometimes when I meet with clients and they have that kind of information and they can't unknow it. They can't unsee something or they can't unhear something. And they knew all along that this marriage wasn't going to work. And yet they had to have that kind of confirmation that Sarah's talking about. And what happens is it didn't help. It only hurt them worse. So what we're encouraging people to do is really kind of trust in yourself. And if you can't trust in yourself, let's take a moment and understand why. What is it going on? Is this reality? A lot of times it is. Or is this something that's a issue that you just need to work through with your spouse, a trust issue between the marriage? But I really love the way you said that, Sarah. I think it's very important to acknowledge that we all do this. We all check ourselves and say, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Right. Anytime I see something odd, you kind of take a step back and that process goes into it. So it's fine that you're doing that. There's nothing wrong with you. But when you get to the stage when you're coming to see a divorce lawyer and you're asking about a private investigator, that's the time to take a hard check.
Yeah, and I'll leave people with this thought is to get past this, whether it's you're staying married or you're getting divorced, because there's plenty of people who get past adultery and are able to stay married and go work on the marriage. The anecdote to this is creating a vision for your future, whether it's a vision for your future post-divorce or vision for your marriage post the adultery. And then let that vision of the future paint your present. Let that dictate what you do now. If you are going back and obsessing over the adultery, past the point of diminishing returns to your health, to your relationships, to your mental sanity, then you're letting the past paint your present. And that will put you in an endless loop. And no court's going to get you out of that. No judgment from the judge is going to get you out of that. So really, once you're past the mourning phase and you're like coming to terms with the reality, paint a vision of your future, divorced or working on the marriage, either one. Let that be the lens that you make your decisions for your present come from. Thank you, Shawna.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Happily Ever After Divorce podcast. If you'd like to learn more, go to atlantadivorcelawgroup.com/resources.